Good morning to all my friends and family, and welcome to this episode of all that I've learned from Tony Robbins throughout the years. This today is episode number 9 of 50 or more. I've set myself a goal of doing 9 of these. I've set myself a goal of doing 50 of these, and I know how I operate. When I say 50, it may mean 500. So I'm going to start with a small goal, a sub goal, and when I get close to my 50, the key message to everybody is that we need to have extension goals so that we can keep on going. So what we're going to do today is continue our journey of discovery, where we take OPE, other people's experiences, in the form of books, in the form of seminars, in the form of learning that we do along the way, and we convert it to wisdom and knowledge and potential power. Got a little bush turkey there in front of us. We'll see where they go. We'll keep on following it. But as I say, I've been to 3 UPWs over the years. My first UPW was in 94, then I followed up in 95, and this year I did the one here in Sydney in 2023, so 30 years, or almost 30 years, between my first and the last one that is hosted here in Sydney. And since then, of course, I've read Anthony Robbins' books, or 2 of his key books, Unlimited Power, which is the first one, and Awaken the Giant Within. And as I've mentioned before, not only did I read those books, but I studied those books intently, highlighting them, underlining them, making annotations, and just trying to absorb as much of that material that I could. And what I can safely say is that even though 30 years have passed since that first UPW, much of the material that Anthony Robbins talked about this time round was very, very similar to the things that he talked about back 30 years ago, which once again confirms and validates that the material that is included in UPW is timeless. And even though the years have passed, the message is still the same, and it's still valued, and it still works. So strap yourself in and we'll see what we can learn today. Yesterday we talked a lot about gratitude, and that gratitude destroys suffering, so how important it is to express gratitude for what we have in our lives rather than to focus on the things that we don't have, and also the understanding that expectation kills joy. And the call to action from Anthony Robbins is to trade expectation for appreciation, and your whole life will change in the moment. And we also learnt another thing that is going on in the world and in our lives, and it's called negative stacking. It's done by the media, it's done on social media, and what it does is it takes things that trigger us, takes the various things that trigger our negative emotions, more so the negative ones and the positive ones, and it stacks one upon the other. And the reason why the media outlets use this negative stacking technique is because it works. It catches your attention. It stops you in your tracks. It gets you thinking, and it distracts you from what you were doing or what you plan to do. Because people always have, I'm not saying that people now are any different to the way people were in the past, but we need to understand that people have always been starved for wisdom, thinking that wisdom will change their lives and wisdom will make them smarter or better. Tony Robbins always teaches people that wisdom that is not applied is just potential power. You can't do very much by knowing things. The only way you can change your life is by doing the things that you know. So the world is starved of wisdom, and what happens is that newspapers, social media and the like use negative stacking as clickbait. They'll just say something which is, I guess, silly or stupid or not all that smart, and it's called clickbait. They just want to get your attention, because that's how they get paid. That's how people get paid these days, by getting people to click onto their article, click into their site, and they get paid per click. And the other thing we need to understand is that negative stacking, as we said here, or trigger stacking, is the norm right now. So you've got to expect to be bombarded by negative stacking, by trigger stacking, by one thing on the other, just to capture your attention, just to disturb you, just to distract you. But we can do something about it. The thing that we learned at Tony Robbins is that for every one negative in our lives, for every one negative trigger or negative thing that is triggered, we need 10 positives to get us back to status quo, because negative things trigger us in a way which is quite dramatic, and we need to somehow find a way to undo the distraction that is caused by negative triggering. And we need to learn, this is very important, to stack the positive. Because what happens is, in our brains, when we are negatively triggered, when something happens that distracts us or upsets us or scares us, our brain reverts back to its primitive form, and we are converted, chemically converted, physiologically changed into our fight, flight or freeze response. So cortisol and adrenaline surge into our bloodstreams and put us on high alert and keep us on high alert for up to about 20 minutes or half an hour, is what the science tells us. And what you've got to understand is that when you're watching the media, or when you're in social media, or reading news articles, or watching the news on television, what they'll do is they'll trigger stack you. They'll negatively trigger stack you so that you're emotionally connected and attached and distracted, and that will last for maybe up to half an hour. And when you're in that state, when you're distracted, when your attention span is enticed and captured by these negative news or negative items, it will take you a while to get over it. So you're hooked. So in order to undo the damage to our bodies, in order to subdue the cortisol and the adrenaline that is in our bloodstream, we need to rely on maybe 10 or so positive stacks just to help us relax, just to help us feel calm, just to reassure us so that we can get back to the state that we were in before that original negative stimulus that hit us. So there's a technique there to help us reduce stress. And the way we reduce stress is by snapping out where possible and knowing that our body has adrenaline and cortisol surging through it. We need to learn how to relax, because when we are relaxed, when we're in a beautiful state, then we're in a better position to be rational, to be logical, to have engaged our thinking brain as opposed to our emotional brain. The other thing that Anthony talked about was the fact that when we are born, or not before, actually before we were born, just after we are conceived, and I never knew this, so I'm going to be honest, this is the first time I've ever heard this, but I thought it was quite amazing. When we are conceived, our heart develops before our brain. And to a certain extent, you can think of the following, that your heart has its own intelligence, and a fetal heart is the brain of the fetus because it develops before the brain does. The heart starts beating very, very early in a pregnancy. And so the heart has something very, very special about it, and we need to acknowledge it and understand that. You know, a heart isn't something insignificant. It's something which is pretty important and pretty cool. And science now informs us that when you focus on something and express gratitude, this is really interesting. Your heart and brain waves are synchronized. They are synchronized physically, and that can be proven by taking scientific sort of tests. And then Anthony Robbins here says and reminds us that all you have to do in your life is change your focus. You don't have to change your life. If you change what you focus on, you will change what you see, what you feel, and what your reality is. And once again, the huge call to action is that we must continue to remind ourselves how wonderful our lives are, how our lives have been, and how wonderful our lives are going to be. Because at the end of the day, humans live in hope, and there is a Greek saying that I learnt growing up: the last thing that dies is hope. So we've got to hope for a better future. We need to live with positive expectancy in order to attract positivity into our lives. We need to enjoy and be gracious and to be present, ever present in the present moment of our lives, rather than spending too much time in our past or too much time in our future. By all means, have one foot in the past and one foot in the future, and use the past as a reference and the future as a magnet to draw you to where you want to go. But we are given a lifetime which is basically the eternal now. Now, there is no past and there is no future. It's just a figment of our imagination. We are living in the eternal now. And our soul, from the moment that we are conceived, is part of the eternal now, the now that will exist forever and ever. And our soul will never, ever not be part from now on, or from the time you're conceived, will never ever not be part of the eternal now. So we need to spend most of our time here and now. And I also remember reading somewhere else, I don't know if Tony Robbins talked about this, but I'm sure that he alluded to it many times. People who spend far too much time in the past, far too much time ruminating about their negative past and having the negative stories being replayed over and over and over again in their heads, will tend to be, guess what? What do you think will they tend to be? They'll tend to be depressed, is the message that comes with this observation. And the people who spend far too much time thinking about the future and replaying the future and visualizing the negative future in their minds, worrying about what's going to happen in the future, well, they're going to be anxious. They're going to suffer from anxiety. So the two worst mental health crises that we have in the world, depression and anxiety, can be, I guess, reduced to the fact that people are spending far too much time either in their negative past or too much time worrying about the negative future that they're able to see and make real in their mind's eye. But Tony Robbins once again reminds us, and we've talked about this before, but we'll need to remind us again and again, because it is a beautiful way of looking at life, that each and every person has had a wonderful life. The decisions that we've made along the way are mostly good decisions. The reason why we have survived, the reason why we are still here, the reason why we are around, I guess I can't say it any other way, is because of the successful and good decisions that we have made. By all means, we've made some crappy decisions. We've made some silly decisions. We've made some decisions which we're not proud of. But everybody makes those decisions, and those decisions enable us to grow and develop and to put life into perspective. It may have been a good decision at that moment, where we hadn't really considered the first, second and third level consequences. But as life goes on, we build good judgment, because good judgment comes from bad judgment, comes from bad experiences. But when we have bad judgment and bad experiences, we build patterns, we learn patterns, we make observations, and we can compare and contrast those patterns that we have and work out a better way of living and a better way of doing things. So Anthony Robbins says at any point in time, and this is guaranteed, at any point in time we can change our life by changing what we focus on. You can focus, and you've got a choice. Anthony Robbins reminds us and tells us, you've got a choice. You can either choose to focus on the rubbish in life, or you can choose to focus on the beauty in our life. The choice is yours. And each path has many branches, each path has many other paths, windows that you can take. But we have a choice in terms of where we focus, and where we focus is our new reality, our reality. And Anthony Robbins once again reminds us we can go back over our lives, or we can go forward into our lives, and we can change the stories. Instead of worrying about things, we can celebrate life. We can always go and ask ourselves the question. You can go there at any time and just ask yourself, remember when I was young and I made a good decision. You know, remember your successes, remember how you felt, remember how it looked, remember how it tasted, remember all of those things. You don't have to focus, you don't have to spend your time caught up with the negative things that happened in your life, because you've got a whole range of choices you can make. You can choose to think about the good times that you had with your parents, the good times you had with your friends and everybody else, rather than focusing on that one moment that made your life a little bit different. Or rather, you made your life a little bit different by focusing on something that wasn't going to make you fulfilled and happy. And the other thing that Anthony Robbins says is that our heart often has the answer. So we need to consult our heart, our second brain, the thing that formed and beated before our brain was formed, the thing that goes into sync with our brain when we express gratitude and love and a good place in our lives. So we need to change our focus, and we can change our focus in a heartbeat. It's all about attitude, and as I say to people, you can be happy, you can be satisfied, you can be grateful and express gratitude. All it is a decision that you make. I made a decision from when I was young that I'm going to be happy, and I always revert back to a happy place because that's what I decided to do. We all know people in our lives who are grumpy. At some point in time, they made a decision in their lives that they wanted to be grumpy. They wanted to be unhappy. They wanted to focus on the things that were negative. I also remember years ago at the UPW where Anthony Robbins mentioned that basically there are two types of people in the world. There are people who are matches, and there are people who are mismatches. And the difference between these two people will change the way they see the world, the way they see life, and the way they experience their reality. Because a matcher is a person who will try and find a common element in the universe and everything around them. They will look for the beauty in people, they will look for the beauty in the world that surrounds them, and they will build a bridge between where they are and where they need to go. The mismatcher, on the other hand, is a person who tends to be pessimistic. What they'll do is they'll spend time just focusing on all the negative things in the world, all the negative things in their lives, and it's much easier to be a mismatcher. It's much easier to find what's wrong, what's different, what's bad, what's going to make you unhappy. It's harder, it takes more effort, it takes love to be able to forgive the people around you and to meet them where they actually are. Because we all have a different life, we all have experienced a different past, we're all going to experience a very different future as well. And Anthony Robbins invites us all to meet people where they are, because life has its seasons, life has its phases, life has its chapters as well, and we are all at different roads along the way, and we need to meet ourselves and we need to meet others where they are, and that takes effort, it takes empathy, it takes love to be able to see past your own needs and realise that people are different from each other, but we're different for each other, and we're at different stages of development and growth. And whilst I may be in summer, someone else may be in winter, and vice versa. But to meet people where they are. Anthony Robbins then goes on to say that we also need to keep our lives simple, because complexity, this is a beauty, pay attention to this one here, it's just an absolute cracker. Complexity is the enemy of execution. We need to make things simple. We need to keep things simple. We need to explain things to our children, to ourselves, to our partners, to everybody we come into contact with. We need to keep things simple in order to make them workable. Because if you make it too complicated, too complex, then the complexity is going to stifle any progress and make things very, very hard, if not impossible. I just love the beautiful sound of that little brook pouring into this little billabong area here. It's wonderful. So at the end of the day, we need to be practical. And in order to be practical, we need to understand that we need to take baby steps. By all means be bold in our actions, but we need to take progressive baby steps that will either get us closer or further or much closer to where we want to go. So we need to be practical psychologists in our lives to not only help ourselves but also to help those around us, because there are times when we are more resourceful and there are times when we're less resourceful, and we need to appreciate the fact that we go between one and the other from time to time. And we need to find a way, just like this little creek here, this little brook. The water will always find its way It'll find its way over the rocks, under the rocks, through the rocks, around the rocks. And similarly, we too as humans need to be like water. We need to be flexible in our approach so that we can get to where we want to get to, knowing that life is constantly changing. The only thing constant in life, or the only two things constant in life, is God and change. We're changing. The environment is changing. The world is changing. Our relationships are changing. And if we're not working to make things stronger, if we're not growing and developing, then we're dying and decaying. And once again, the big warning that Tony Robbins gives to his audience is that today's 8 is going to be tomorrow's 6s. So if you're living an 8 at the moment and you love your life, then you need to work at it. You need to keep on working at it, because if you do nothing, then you're going to atrophy. Your relationships are going to atrophy. Your body is going to atrophy. Your mental capability is going to atrophy, and we're going to go backwards. So in order to maintain the status quo, we've got to work at it. In order to improve our state, we need to improve our focus and work at it as well. So that life is what you focus on. And I remember back in the early 90s when I was working at OTC, there was a sales manager there, a friend of mine that I went to school with, Bill Maywis, who I worked with at IBM as well. And Bill said to me back then, and it was quite profound, even though I was in my early 30s and was a father and had a family, sometimes you need peers to say things and keep you on the right track. And he said, James, we are what we focus on. So whatever you focus on is who you are. It's your reality. And it's one of those things that has stuck with me ever since, and one of those powerful concepts that do shape my everyday. And just like, as we say, we are what we focus on. At the end of the day, God gave us the ability to focus and the opportunity to be one with God, to glorify God, to love God with all our heart, mind and soul, to love our neighbour as we love ourselves. He gave us every opportunity to enjoy the most magnificent creation that he did out of love for all of us, for humankind. And what we need to do is we need to thank him for it. And that's why we have church services, where we have Eucharist services, where we thank God for all that we have in our lives, all that we are, and to believe in his providence and to submit to his love, knowing that everything he does it for the betterment of our soul and of our lives. And he dearly wants us to be his children. He wants us to be one with him and to live the best life that we possibly can. He also wants us to be partners in creation, to work with him so that all creation enjoys the love of God, and not to be selfish, but to be selfless. to give more than what you want to take out of life, to be supportive, to be a comforter, to help, to take the gifts that God has given you in multitudes and to share those gifts with other people who don't have as many gifts as you have. The reason why we become smart, the reason why we become educated, the reason why we become connected and networked with many people, the reason why we make lots of money, the reason why God gives us success is not so that we can rest on our laurels and live the life of Ryan, but to take those gifts, to take that success, to take the love of God that He has shared with us and to share it with our neighbour and other people who are less fortunate, people who haven't yet made the most of the gifts that they have, because we're all finding our way. Sometimes people learn it quickly, other people need a whole lifetime in order to learn that what they have are gifts of God and that we need to use them to glorify God and to love one another. So the other thing that Anthony Robbins says is that we need to be practical psychologists, and we need to ask ourselves, what is it that keeps people from getting what they want? And to try and understand what makes yourself tick and what makes others tick, and to realise that the key obstacle that people have in their lives, the thing that holds them back, is fear. Fear is fear. Fear of losing, fear of not getting, or fear of other people taking it from them. For many people, they're afraid of failure. There's a fear of being rejected and being unloved and unlovable. And Anthony Robbins harps on and talks about the two primary fears that all humans are faced with. And this is something that is virtually universal to all people. So by understanding the fear that most people have, the primary fears, you're best able to address those in some way, shape or form. So the two primary fears that Anthony Robbins talks about is the first one being, I'm not enough. I'm not enough. People always, or most people, seem to think that they're not good enough. They're not good enough to do something. We have a thing called imposter syndrome, where people think that other people are much better than them at doing something, and they're not all that good. In our lives, we'll come across people who overrate what other people are good at and underrate what they're good at. I remember when I was 12 years of age playing in the 12Bs at Newington College. I had a coach back then called Mr. Dockery. Mr. Frank Dockery, that's right. Mr. Frank Dockery. And he always used to say to us, the other players are no different to you. They're made of blood, muscle, they feel pain, they have self-doubt, they are just as worried as you are going into this match. They want to win, they're scared of losing, they're scared of making mistakes. They're no different to you. And I remember just hearing that as a 12-year-old empowered me tremendously, saying, well, if they've got the same fears as me, and they've got the same pain that they can feel and all of those sorts of things, then I've got nothing to worry about. And he says, just go out there and play the lights out. Just play to the best of your ability. Press the opposition at every opportunity that you can, and let them make mistakes based on the pressure that you apply. Be the pressure cooker in their lives. Hustle, 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 and cause them to second think and to doubt their ability. And that way you can overpower any opposition. So the fear of not being good enough is something that everybody shares. But the way you get through that fear, of course, is through bold action, by putting things into perspective and knowing that nobody's been to the future. Nobody knows the outcome. But move over, get out of my way. I can handle this. If you've got that attitude, then you're not going to be reduced to procrastination by some irrational fear that is a figment of your imagination that has come to you either through your own thinking or imagination, or through you've inherited it from other people, your parents, your grandparents, your uncles, your aunts, your workmates, the media, your religion, your culture, traditions, and all of those things. You need to push through fear by knowing that most of the fears that you have are irrational. And as we said, most of the time what we do is we magnify and amplify how good other people are, and we see our own strengths and our own life through a microscope, and we reduce and we underrate the things that we're good at. The fact that we're still around, the fact that we've survived, means that we're good, we're tough, we're capable of anything. Now, you put a gun to a person's head and you threaten them with their life, and then you'll see how much stamina they have, how much, how creative they can become. It's just a matter of focus, as we hear time and time again. So the first of the two primary fears we've just covered, and that's I'm not good enough, where people worry about being caught out, and in order to save face, they prefer to do nothing rather than to do something and for people to find them out. And the second primary fear that most people have, and it influences their life to a magnificent degree, is that they're not good, they're not loved, or they're not lovable. They feel that they're not worthy of love, which is an absolute tragedy just to think about, that people think that they're not good enough. Once again, they've amplified and magnified how lovable other people are, and they've reduced to zero the lovability of themselves. The bottom line is that God loves everybody. So you've got one guarantee in life, one magnificent guarantee, that God loves you, loves me, loves your parents, your siblings, your cousins, loves everybody significantly and greatly and without restriction. Regardless of what you do, God loves us. We can also be guaranteed another thing, but we need to take action. We love ourselves. God calls people to love one another as they love themselves. So you need to love yourself. You need to learn to love and respect and to appreciate and have gratitude for who you are, what you've got, what you're capable of, and to love yourself. Because it's only when you love yourself and you fill your cup with love, the love of God and the love of yourself, that you can really love and learn to love and to express love to other people. So that's a very, very important point. And of course, you're loved by your mother, your father, your grandparents, your uncles, your aunts, even though you may not feel it, even though they may not express it, they love you. There's no doubt about it. My parents have passed away, my grandparents have passed away. And now I look back in my life and I know that they love me and I love them. I often say I just hope that I could make contact with them just one more time, just for 1 nanosecond, just to tell them, to hug them, to squeeze them, to kiss them, and to tell them 2 things. I love you and thank you for all that you have done in my life. But sadly, it's not always the case, because we don't have the gift of time, of bringing people back into our lives. So for that reason, and that reason only, if there are 2 things that we can learn from Anthony Robbins and this episode of this vlog that I'm putting together, is to tell people they are enough, to reassure people, reassure your children, your grandchildren, your cousins, your uncles, your aunts, everybody in your life, your work peers, to reassure them that we are enough, they are enough. And anything else that they do or achieve in their life is a bonus, but they are enough. We love them just the way they are. We enjoy our life just the way it is. And to tell them that you love them, to show them that you love them in a way that they can receive and appreciate, knowing very well that we all have different love languages, and that we express and we feel love in different ways. The way I feel love and express love could be different to the way that you feel love and you express love. Some people do it through touch and feel. Some people do it from hearing and talking, I love you, and having the reassurance by people telling them that they love them all the time. Other people need gifts. They need to see things. They need to see, and for somebody else to prove to them they love them by what they do for them. So we need to understand our love language, and at the same time we need to see, appreciate and respect other people's love language. This is something that we touched on when I did Anthony Robbins in the 90s, the early 90s. We didn't touch on it this time round, but he did talk quite a bit back then about the love language that we have and how we need to understand what makes us tick in order to understand what makes other people tick, and to tell people what makes you feel loved, and to ask other people what makes them feel loved, and just do what works for them. Pretty simple, isn't it? Because Anthony Robbins says here that love is the oxygen of the soul. If there's one thing that you can do and improve, is knowing the art of loving. I'm not talking about knowing and expressing the art of sex. I'm talking about the art of loving. And Anthony Robbins here talks about the fact that everything in the animal kingdom has something very, very special about them. and that human beings and primates are the only two animals that have the highest requirement for dependency. And from a human perspective, once again, this is really, really powerful. Love is our competitive advantage. Love is what sets us apart and makes us extra special as a species. So I think I'll leave it there for now. We'll finish on a high. We'll finish on love and how love sets us apart. Love is our competitive advantage as a species, and love is what separates us from all other animals, and the fact that human beings have a very, very high dependency, because when we're born, we need to be loved. We need our mothers to love us. We need people to care for us. And Anthony Robbins talks about the fact that when a mother gives birth to a child, there's a chemical called oxytocin that is secreted into the bloodstream. Men have oxytocin secreted into their bloodstream as well, into their bodies, into their brain, but nowhere near to the levels that a mother has. And for that reason, when a mother gives birth, they have oxytocin surging into their bodies. Oxytocin is secreted when a woman is breastfeeding, when a couple have sex and climax. It's one of those chemicals that connects people and keeps people connected. So the reason why mothers have a high level of oxytocin secreted into their bodies and their brains when they give birth is so that they can connect with their newborn, and not only connect with their newborn, but to stay connected. That's why mothers see their babies as the most beautiful baby, the most beautiful thing in the whole wide world. Even though when you look at the baby, or look at most babies, you go that baby isn't all that beautiful. But to the parent, to the mother primarily, who is ODing on oxytocin, that baby is without doubt the most beautiful thing that she's ever seen in the world. But the other thing we learned from Anthony Robbins is that oxytocin wears off. And when a baby is 5 years old or elder, the bonding between the mother and baby changes, and it needs to, because the mother may have another baby, or may have a career, or may have some other things to do in her life, and the child needs to grow and develop and not be as dependent as what they were, for their own benefit, so they can grow as humans. So I think I'll leave it there. So thank you very much for joining me on this episode of all that I've learned from Anthony Robbins over the years, where we've taken a small journey today, where we've gone for a bushwalk and we've learnt about various things. And I look forward to coming to you again from another place with another message of empowerment from the great Anthony Robbins, Tony Robbins, and we'll see where it leads us, how it can help us, and what we can glean, what morsels we can savour from all of the material that Anthony Robbins has either presented in a UPW, written in one of his books, Unlimited Power and Awaken the Giant Within, or things that we've taken from all the cassette tapes and interviews that we have listened to and enjoyed over the years as well. Take care, wishing you all the best, and we'll chat again very, very soon. Yassas, and bye for now.